We are going to get into it today with a little bit of an exploration with Kia into the depths of DAOs and dragons. And I think the exploration will take us, sounds like we'll explore patterns using Zodiac as a framework for doing so, one that extends upon gnosis in interesting directions that are in many ways yet to be told. And so I'll let Kia explain the way that things are being thought through there and explored with now a collective of different voices and ideas via the Zodiac Wiki and otherwise. And then we may go from there into a variety of explorations actually using Gnosis Chain and beyond. So Kia, please take it away.
Cool, thanks so much, Vivek. And welcome everybody. So I had a slight change of plans for this lesson because I wanted to do just a little bit more of an interactive tutorial of basically how to mint a token, distribute it to everybody from their wallet addresses, and set up a safe, set up a DAO, exit from the DAO, and do the kind of full gambit in one, and really in an interactive way. But yesterday, the Ringabee test network was actually deprecated in favor of the Goerli test network, which supports the new Ethereum POS chain. And little known to me, some of the apps that I was going to show actually don't have a version on the Goerli testnet yet. So I didn't want to do it with a kind of real tender. So what I'll do instead today is basically I'll give you a quick introduction to the Zodiac toolset that I work on, and basically how it's a slightly different approach to DAOs than I think most tooling you're probably more familiar with takes. And it's particularly inspired by the ideas of like mods and patterns, so pattern languages, which I'll talk a little bit about. And then I will do the kind of tutorial that I had in mind more as like a rapid fire demo on Gnosis Chain. So sadly, it won't be as interactive as I wanted it to be, but hopefully you can kind of look back at the recording and it might be useful for anything you want to do, because it will basically, I'll mint a token, I'll give it to myself, I'll give it to a safe, I'll set up an exit app, and then I'll exit from the safe DAO. So it will be like, hopefully for some of y'all, I know for me, the first time I did it really demystified how to use Ethereum basically, and how it's actually really nice and easy to do your own smart contracts and play around. So yeah, hopefully we can kind of do it more interactive next time, and next session we'll focus more on creating patterns together. And also in the final session, you'll learn how to kind of build your own mod around a given pattern. But yeah, that's just the overview. So as I'm doing the presentation, I'll do the first bit explaining Zodiac, I'll do the second bit explaining patterns, and then I'll open for questions, and then I'll dive into the demo. Hope that sounds good to y'all, and I hope it's fun regardless of the change of plans and the slightly less interactive nature of it.
Yeah, and we can weave in some questions, Kia.
Sure. Sure, that would be nice. Feel free to interject at any time. Oh, I can't screen share while another participant is sharing. You have sound.
Should be good now.
Cool. All right. So what is Zodiac? So Zodiac is the toolset that I work on. It's completely open source and actually aims to be a kind of open standard for different DAO tools that can incorporate it and then become interoperable with each other. We call it internally and externally the expansion pack for DAOs. So the idea that we can extend the functionalities of existing DAO platforms and make them more interoperable with each other. And as we call it, it's a composable design philosophy for DAOs. So it's a collection of tools built according to open standard. Because DAOs are not monoliths, we say, they're constellations. And if you've encountered platforms which I love, like DAO House and Snapshot and Gardens, these platforms are really, really useful, but often you still have to use them in tandem with other tools. And Zodiac seeks to be the kind of connecting line. connecting constellation. So we initially launched with 4 different mods, kind of short for modules, known as exit, delay, reality bridge. I'll go through one of them in more detail today and give an example of a DAO that uses all of them, but the exit one will go into more detail later. So don't feel the need to remember this. All of these tools, they're framework agnostic, so you could use them with any given smart contract account, but we have an interface to them through the Gnosis Safe. So if you go to the Gnosis Safe apps, there's a kind of app store on the Gnosis Safe multisig. I talked about multisigs last time. You'll find Zodiac there. And when you open it, you'll see the ability to add and kind of equip different mods. All of the mods that I just mentioned. But it's more than just a collection of these mods or tools, which I'll talk about their functions of shortly, but it's also an open standard on which anyone can build to ensure DAO interoperability. And we were really inspired by this great paper on modular politics. I can share it in the Slack channel after, by Primavera de Filippi, Nathan Schneider, and I think Josh Chan, maybe a few others. Excuse my leaving them out. And they wrote it thinking about like, what does governance in online communities look like? And they developed the idea of modular politics. So basically allowing the capacity to develop flexible participatory governance regimes. Rather than one size fits all presets, a modular approach allows participants to shape the structure of their action situations. And they can adapt and evolve under changing conditions. And such flexibility would enable a much more rapid iteration and innovation in online governance practices than do prevailing approaches, which tend towards rigid hierarchies and static tool sets. So our kind of Zodiac modules really aim to support a modular politics. And to give an example of what they can do and how they do this, I'll give a story of a DAO. So a DAO begins as a squad with an idea. And they deploy a Gnosis Safe multisig as their avatar to manage shared resources. And this Gnosis Safe has 4 out of 6 signatures required to execute a transaction. And while at first informal proposals through a group chat suffice, eventually their decisions as a squad become more substantial. There's the multisig. And they decide to actually, after starting the multisig, launch a token to expand their project. And in order to keep a formal record of their decisions, they create a snapshot space for token voting. And their first vote includes who should be elected as signers on their safe. And then, using the Zodiac app, they equip exit so that anyone who holds their token can leave the organization with their proportional share of digital assets. So what is the exit Zodiac mod? This is a screenshot of it. Basically, all you have to do to set it up on the DAO side is enter a token contract address, so where a given token lives. And basically what it allows you to do, if some of you are familiar with the case of Constitution DAO, or any other kind of DAO that rapidly raises funds from a bunch of different people and then issues a token. So in the case of Constitution DAO, a bunch of people contributed to a multisig to basically buy a copy of the Constitution. And everyone who contributed was issued people tokens in return, I believe. But there was also an issue kind of in the interim because the bid and the auction for the copy of the Constitution was not successful. So there had to be a way to redeem those funds and send them back. What the exit mod, if they had equipped it, would have allowed was basically to specify the people token as the DAO token. And the safe, the multi-sig would hold a bunch of ether or any kind of given treasury. And anyone who individually held a people token could come back and exchange that people token in exchange for a proportional amount of the treasury. So if you held 1% of all people tokens, you could come to this safe with the exit module equipped and withdraw 1% of the ether in that safe. So it's a way to kind of permissionlessly manage and exit DAOs. So they enter phase 2 by equipping the exit module of basically allowing anyone in the short term to exit if they disagree with the DAO or want to redeem their funds, or if the DAO's objectives fail. And basically, as time goes on, their community starts to grow rapidly because they've done so much considerate work around this. And they've developed many centers of activity around their token-enabled Discord. And one central team managing their Gnosis safe becomes less than ideal. So they equip the Reality Mod. And this is the mod that we have that's in used by the most number of DAOs today. So what it does is it basically allows, you can set it up from the safe here. And you set up a kind of oracle to say whether an event happened on chain. And you set it up on a snapshot space. So Snapshot, we saw it last time, is a voting platform. I'm sure a lot of y'all are familiar with it. But you can add the SafeSnap plugin here and set up different transactions and connect it to your safe so that when a vote passes that has a transaction attached to it, like this one, where you could say there's a proposal on the Snapshot space to a DAO to transfer funds for a grant program, and you attach that transaction to the proposal. If that proposal is deemed successful and passes through the oracle, then anyone can execute the transaction that was attached to it. So it's basically, you'll hear a lot in DAOs of it's not a DAO if it's just a multi-sig with a number of signers. So what the Reality Mod, the Zodiac Reality Mod allows you to do is to connect a multi-sig to a voting platform and allow successful votes to be executed by anyone in the community. You don't have to rely on a set number of signers to execute it. So that's where we aim to be a kind of constellation linking force. And with instituting the Reality Mod, this DAO has now taken a massive leap towards decentralization. However, the safe signers, the multi-sig signers, still have veto power. So you could enable another Zodiac mod called Scope, which limits the scope of the transactions that the signers can execute. So it could be that they could only execute transactions in the case of a malicious attack rather than voting. And you know that you no longer have to trust the signers to be able to not veto any of the transactions that come from the voting platform. So basically with just these 3 mods enabled and a few other tools, I would say that this DAO has reached actually full decentralization in its management of its resources. So basically being able to have anyone in the community leave with their proportional share of funds by themselves permissionlessly, and also have anyone be able to request funds and execute the transaction for those funds. And it basically equips DAOs for whatever adventures they may face. And these mods are kind of designed to take decision-making beyond token voting, looking to hybrid models using time delays and anti-collusion methods. And the main thing is that in developing these tools, we seek to decouple avatars or accounts from decision-making, meaning that governance, membership, and treasury management can be customized independently of any of one of the tools that a DAO uses. And with something like a programmable account at their core, it allows organizations to evolve over time, which is really important for their well-being because these aren't static forms. All DAOs change over time, and often a lot of the platforms don't recognize that. So you could have an example where DAO basically starts with a Gnosis safe and then wants to go to like a DAO house DAO. And there's a way to seamlessly transition where you have the Gnosis safe core contract, but the DAO house DAO voting goes back to the multi-sig contract. So basically allowing DAOs to change rather than having to go from one size fits all platform to another. And if you want to learn more about what we're doing, my team that builds them is called Gnosis Guilds. We have a Discord. And we also, that's where I publish a lot of essays too on our blog. But we are one of actually many teams who have built Zodiac mods now, and we really encourage it because we really believe it as like a public good for the ecosystem, that there should be more composable DAO tooling. So yeah, you can check out the GitHub, and basically to create a mod, all you have to do is submit a pull request, and the last session of all of these tutorials, so not next one, but the last one, will show you really simply how to build one. And basically, the main thing you have to do is include a Solidity file, kind of like importing a library file into your application. And then it can become automatically compatible with other Zodiac tools and platforms. I'll pause briefly there for any questions, and then I'll dive into pattern languages.
Perfect. Please unmute if you do have any questions. Kia, I can start you off with a couple. One, like really fascinating thing that you said was the idea that it might be decouple avatars from decision making. And I think that the story that you shared in some sense like outlines how that can unfold as it evolves. But perhaps you could just like talk a bit about the philosophy there, decoupling avatars from decision making.
Yeah, so the way that a lot of DAOs function today is that there's one kind of contract address that like is the DAO. And that contract address and that kind of DAO has all of the kind of voting, decision-making, treasury management, etc., other tools, other functions attached to it. So in the case of a multi-signature wallet, which is maybe the most common starting pattern for DAO, you inherently have the idea of how decisions should be made baked into it. So a multi-sig will always have a set number of owners. Well, I shouldn't say always, by default has a set number of owners, and a set number of owners can sign a transaction. So what you get by default is kind of something like a board structure where you need a majority, let's say 4 out of 6 signers to approve a transaction. So you have this kind of baked in decision-making at its core. And you see this for a lot of DAOs as well, where there's things, snapshot, you can change it, but there's a kind of snapshot space where you have the main voting account, and then you have a separate multi-sig, or you have the DAO house platform where there's a main DAO and the type of decision-making is specific to the Moloch framework. Or you have on Gardens DAO, you create a DAO and the type of voting is conviction voting. And these are all intimately tied to the account that you create. What we think is that we should actually kind of harness the power of all smart contracts to be extendable. So with the safe, it's really not just a multi-sig wallet. It really can be a set of kind of, we call them more programmable accounts. So a set of different functions that can be extended. So you can do things like basically have the safe contract because you know that the code has so far proven to be pretty secure. So why not have that code actually hold the funds? But then you have a different account or a different contract that basically manages the decision making. And you can have these kind of communicate with one another, but not be deeply embedded and baked into one another. So you could have a kind of Gardens DAO with conviction voting on Gnosis chain, control a safe that's on mainnet that holds the funds where they're secure. So the idea that you can kind of pull apart these different functions and have real customizability is the idea behind having like an avatar account and having decision-making interoperable but separate.
Beautiful, beautiful. If we have time for one more, okay, I think there was one more.
Sure.
Oh, John, do you still have a question? I'd have lost John. Okay. Anyone else?
Sure. Kia, first of all, love Pikachu. Amazing reference as per usual. The other thing that it might just be worth double tapping is the mention that you hope Zodiac will be able to extend like beyond just token voting into other mechanisms. I wonder if you would just spend like 2 more minutes, perhaps like talking about some of the mechanisms which you think are like the next steps once we're able to truly illustrate the power of distributed decision making, decoupling it from avatars. Like, where do we go after just like enabling better snapshot votes?
Yeah, there's 2 things. One is this doesn't necessarily limit token voting, but I think it's really clear that private voting is needed for DAOs. So the next kind of larger scale project my team is working on is a tool for private voting, which you'll be able to use as a kind of Zodiac mod and interoperable with the tool set. In terms of actually different mechanisms of voting, so there's conviction voting, which is interesting, where basically you're able to signal your preference and an outcome of an event. And the longer you signal your preference one way or another, the kind of stronger your vote weight becomes. So you could say, should we give these a large sum of money to an ecosystem grant program? And you could say yes several months before the vote comes to close, or several weeks. And then if you change to no, it flips your power. But if you hold that yes, it becomes more powerful over time. So there's an incentive to vote early and keep your position, whereas some other, yeah. And there's also a kind of show of conviction, and hence the name conviction voting. And it's a way to both codify attention and conviction in voting mechanisms. There's also one more mechanism, which my team is working on, which will be an experiment, because we say like token voting, but I also hold in my heart that we don't really know like what tokens can do yet, or like what tokens are. Right now they resemble like existing forms, but I think that like they can be programmed quite differently. My team are working on what I'll publish a paper on called evolving tokens. So, and actually inspired a bit by like the Pokemon system. To not gamify governance, but actually to slow the pace of governance and to not make it as plutocratic, but also to make it enjoyable. So the basic premise of evolving tokens is that the first round is never for sale in a market. They're given to kind of trusted friends and widely out of a project, and they have zero governance power to start. They have governance power as people contribute full-time, part-time, and occasionally, often alongside other contributions, so not as in exchange for free labor. And as the contributions go up, we'll have like peer-to-peer attestation ceremonies every quarter, where we attest that someone has contributed this amount of time or an other form of contribution. And the NFT itself will level up both in governance power, but also it's an on-chain SVG. So the wand, which will be the NFT design, the wand itself will become more intricate and ornate as you level it up. And basically you'll be able to use these wands as you hold them for their leveled up governance power. That governance power will be tied to a given account and won't be transferable with the NFT. So that's just one experiment that we'll do and see how it goes.
Good deal. Anna Marie, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for explaining conviction voting in a way that has helped me understand it, even though I've read about it and multiple times. So thank you. I'm really curious in what you've said. Do you think at some point we might be able to have voting where multiple tokens can be brought into the same vote, so that you might have like different stakeholder groups with different voting tokens, and therefore you could like set a weight to what percentage of weight in a vote is depending on the stakeholder view? Or
yeah, that's definitely possible. I don't know about weighted yet, but for instance, like you have to do it, like you can do it kind of on Snapshot today, where it's a so like for instance, Gnosis DAO does this in the sense that because tokens on different chains, even if they're the same token, are actually different tokens. So for instance, like a GNO on mainnet is kind of different than a GNO in on Gnosis chain or elsewhere. And also like a GNO lock somewhere is maybe different than a circulating GNO. So you can go on Snapshot and actually set, they're called Snapshot Strategies. You can do fairly complex things with them. So you could actually, I'm pretty sure, very easily put different token contract addresses that are eligible to vote. So you could do a multi-token vote already. I don't know if it's if weighted tokens, if you would be able to get so in the weeds of weighting those different tokens differently. But I don't see why not in the future. It just might not be baked into like a strategy might not be able to parse that yet. But yeah, I think that would definitely be possible. And I'm sure the Snapshot team would be interested in supporting an endeavor to kind of make that interoperable.
okay, thank you. Sure.
Mhm.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, perhaps we move on to patterns. I mean, we have about 30.
Yeah, I might have to cut the demo short, but basically, I'll describe a little bit now about patterns, and this will basically prep us for the next session, which I'll give another introduction shortly to patterns at the next session, but it will really be much more hands-on of thinking through what are the kind of patterns of organizations we've all been a part of, and also like the patterns of DAOs we've witnessed, and also maybe like patterns we want to project into the future. And we'll do like a workshop where we split out into teams and stuff to develop those. But yeah, this will just be a brief introduction to them to hopefully get you excited for next week. So the idea of a pattern language describes a problem and the core of a solution that can be used in many ways within a specific field of expertise. Let me just 1 second look at my slides. Okay, and the idea of a pattern language was developed in the 70s by Christopher Alexander, an architect who sadly passed away this year, and a team thinking through how could you do a kind of vernacular architecture. So basically an architecture that wasn't necessarily top-down blueprint oriented, but something that took kind of small patterns of existing cultures and communities and combined them. So for example, in the book, A Pattern Language and the Timeless Way of Building from Alexander, there's this one example of combining a bunch of different patterns to create like an overall structure. So you could come with the idea of a house for one person, and you could take certain patterns like, unfortunately, this is Northern Hemisphere oriented, so south facing outdoors, with the idea that you have a sun facing outdoors. Also that you have a garden growing wilds. One thing, light on two sides, you want to make sure that every room in the structure has a window on two sides and light coming in some way. You want to take wall membranes, which was this kind of conceptual idea of how walls should have kind of porosity from one room to another. But basically you could develop all of these vernacular ideas of like what makes a building nice to be lived in, what makes it feel whole and comforting, and being able to combine them in a kind of assemblage to produce an overall building. Basically a pattern language can attempt to express what brings aliveness within a particular field of a human endeavor through a set of interconnected patterns. So I'll say a little bit more in the history next time, but it's basically not aiming to be one pattern language for the world, but you could think of every kind of community, context, culture has its own pattern language that develops through time. And the idea is that you want a living structure that can kind of evolve. So all of these patterns can change and have their own autonomy. And also, you know, you can add them on to a building, certain things like this. And this idea of pattern languages actually became quite influential to, I'll give the full history now. I don't have the slides for it, but I think you'll get it without the slides. It became quite influential to software programmers in the early 90s, particularly Ward Cunningham and his partner. And they developed a book thinking through basically giving like patterns a little bit of a different format. So they gave them more of that kind of problem and solution format. So this is an example of a potential pattern for a DAO. But the discussion on governance proposals is fragmented across platforms. The pattern solution will be proposed a canonical discussion space. You can give an example. So one discussion space. So the programmers who got really into the idea of pattern languages came up with this kind of replicable format for patterns. For me, I kind of tend to prefer like Christopher Alexander, the architect's more poetic style, but these you can see already are kind of very amenable to reproducibility in a way. And so Ward Cunningham wrote this book on kind of pattern languages for best practices in software. And I met up with him once and he was talking about it and he was like, yeah, people thought the book was nice, but no one really got into it. No one really like started creating their own patterns or contributing to like the overall language. And then it got him thinking, you know, well, maybe it's something about the medium itself of a book. Maybe it should be different. And he went on in 1995, it specifically inspired by pattern languages to create the world's wiki world web. I forget the name of it. Basically the first wiki. So pre-Wikipedia, obviously. But it was the idea of like a kind of online software that people could amend, change, add to, grow over time, basically an evolving medium of knowledge, and released patterns through that for software development. And then actually that grew the community and contributions and made people start contributing much more than the book. So there was something kind of intimately linked of the medium for patterns and community involvement. And really just influential across the whole field of software design and architecture. So a few more related to DAOs in this kind of format are, you could say for DAOs, taking now the idea of pattern languages, so kind of small discrete patterns that can be combined to make an organization. You could take, for example, the multi-organizational pattern. So the problem could be that new areas of interest evolve that can't be channeled through the core team in a DAO. And a solution would be propose a working group model and a link to like a sub-DAO or MakerDAO model. Another one could be a DAO has to trust an exceedingly busy and distant core team to execute multi-sig proposals. And a solution could be propose expanding the multi-sig to a treasury accessible by the community. So much like I spoke about before, basically, when I was talking about the Zodiac Reality Mod, the Reality Mod was specifically inspired by this pattern where you have a DAO that is basically a multi-sig of people, and that's a bit of a bottleneck and a little bit too trustful. So the Zodiac Mod was built to basically allow anyone to execute proposals on a multi-sig that are successful, any proposals that are successful on a multi-sig. So by taking this kind of granular, modular, pattern-based approach, we develop tools. And I think it's important to say that it's for any kind of patterns or wiki or best practices to be like a really living language, so not just to be like a kind of fossilized set of documentation or best practices that becomes outdated as soon as it's published. It should be the shared vision of a group of people, very specific to their culture, able to capture hopes and dreams, containing many childhood memories and special ways of doing things. That's why my team, we started Zodiac.wiki, which is meant to be a pattern language for DAOs. So it's actually live today. If you go to Zodiac.wiki, it uses the MediaWiki software for now. We want to expand it to, we want to help and kind of be more instrumental in developing a Web3 wiki. And what that means, but for the moment it uses very normal wiki software, and it contains different patterns that next week we can work on together, and it's your choice of whether you submit it to the wiki or not, but just the idea of basically being able to work organizationally through a set of kind of small discrete patterns and combine them with others feels very suited to kind of like a DAO decentralized organizational approach. And yeah, so we'll split into groups next week and document patterns and orgs and see where we have different cross references. Yeah, that's it on the patterns. I would pause again for any questions related to them. Again, I'll do like a longer intro and we'll have the workshop next week. But I just want to stop and say any questions before I go into a demo that's kind of very different.
Beautiful, beautiful. I wonder, Guy, if you're willing to speak about expert systems, given it seems like this touched you there. Otherwise, open to other questions too.
I can mention it a little bit. It was just that it reminded me of, because it was like in computing, it was to be able to bring logic, but that is not exact. So it was like a name of a thing where you would say, if a bit like this, then that, a bit like that, like using fuzzy logic, but not trying to be prescriptive. And then the machine takes in, like gives like, here is something like that. So it reminded me of that. And I found it like much more intuitive to deal with for talking to machines, for humans. So I quite like I didn't know that there was a pattern language from architecture practice as well. So I really like that.
Yeah, it sounds very similar. There's like also, yeah, and it becomes more kind of like replicable, kind of more intelligible from a functional perspective. There's a great kind of crossover as well called the Hackerspace Design Pattern Wiki. which, are you familiar with it? It's
No, hackerspace design, but yes, of course. That was like a 90s thing, isn't it? Like when hackerspaces are being built. Yeah.
Yeah. So that helps a lot of different hackerspaces. For everybody, basically it was like how do you kind of take care of the trash? How do you take care of membership? What if one member is unhappy? So a kind of series of like if this then that patterns that were like tested across different community spaces, and they're all on a wiki now. And that allowed basically from the 90s, like a bunch of different hacker spaces to set up and kind of have a set of rules and a kind of code of conduct and all of that. So it's really nice and that was all inspired by pattern languages. So there's a lot of overlap between these communities.
Kia, one of the discussions that has been ongoing in the kernel Slack has to do around a paper that was released by some sociologists and hackers in June this year, which made the point that in order to develop critical engineering practices and keep the culture of hackerdom from being fully recuperated by capitalistic practices, we needed three things, which is technical skill, shared values, and collective memory. So like technical skill and collective memory you've somewhat covered already, and the reference to the hackerspace stuff is interesting because it also reminds me of unmonastery and things that went more towards kind of the shared values piece. Like it's really, really critical that we develop autonomy in the sense of technical skill, the ability to run our own systems, the ability to build our own mods, the ability to express the kinds of governance patterns that are unique to our community contexts and our local needs. We need collective memory. We have a public chain shared ledger, which is verifiable and relates to what you were talking about last week. And I wonder what your perspective is on shared values as it relates to pattern languages and these kinds of organic community software that we contribute to over time.
Yeah, so I think that kind of quote that I had from before kind of speaks a little bit to the shared values, and that I think sometimes we think when we come up with like a code of ethics that and sometimes they are, but they assume a universality when in fact they always bear like the specific artifacts from the community that created them, even if the ethics may be very similar to other communities. So I think there isn't like a kind of, there will always be a given, let's say bias, or you could say bias or values that come in a set of patterns. So like, for instance, with doing Zodiac Wiki, it's all of those patterns that are on there and that will come there. I think because we've reached out, even though it's an open platform, we've reached out to specific communities that we feel values align with, that there will be a set of values kind of implicitly embedded within all of those patterns. So for instance, the multi-sig pattern that I talked about before, there is a kind of embedded value there that it is of value to give more people access to more resources in a transparent way that should not necessarily be gatekept by people who happen to start the organization or happen to have the power in the organization. So I think that values, often people think it is really important to make your values explicit, but always to know that like as you give these explicit value statements, then you have this whole like implicit journey you go on where you're operationalizing those values and you're creating new ones through their operationalization. And then you have to come back and surface them again. But that always within a pattern, there will be an embedded value made implicit. So I tend to be a little bit less leading with values from the start, because I think a group has to like work together and get to know each other to produce the values. I think too often groups start with big mission statements and values, which maybe can be good as a kind of shelling point if you have a lot of different parties, but in general, the values tend to be more emergent rather than often, there's the mission statements that get never looked at again. So I think patterns are a good way to cultivate implicit values that can then be made explicit and surfaced later on. And I think a lot of that is just one more note on that is about shared context as well. So you mentioned Unmonastery. It was a project I did a while ago with some people, and we actually shared a living space. But I think that can be sharing an online community, that can be participating in the DAO ecosystem. There has to be kind of some soft membrane, I think, through which those emergent values happen, and it has to be real kind of relationship and connection to make those values emerge, whether it could be a project, could be actual relationship, could be anything. But there has to be a real kind of social mutualism there.
I love it was just posted in the chat. It says writing the DNA rather than describing the organism. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, the kind of set of rules rather than the statement of morals, I would say. There's a funny example of Saint Benedict, a kind of early monk guy. Basically, rather than starting a bunch of monasteries, he wrote the Benedictine Rule, which was like a set of like 12 principles about how to treat your fellow monks. And then a bunch of people got them and basically started their own monasteries and used these rules. So yeah, a little bit like conceptual art there.
Yeah, and it was a pattern that was then adopted by many others. So you have the rule of St. Francis and the Franciscan order and the poor Clares. And the story of Clare is really fascinating because she wrote her own rule, which was then, and she was the person who was most quickly canonized after her death in the history of the church. One of the most lesser known but truly fascinating patterns of sort of Christian organization, the poor Clares. Just incredible.
Yeah, everyone should look up St. Clare because everyone knows St. Francis of Assisi, but actually Clare was better and is also from Assisi in there. So yeah.
Early monk guys around here. I have to apologize to mostly everyone because we have to keep it to another 13 minutes. I'm sure Kia could go a bit over. I don't know if we want to do the whole switch to another Zoom room thing again, but I think we can just try as we.
Well, I can ask what y'all would prefer. We could look at Zodiac Wiki, or I could do like a really fast demo, and then there probably won't be any room for more questions. Could I don't know if there's any like polling mechanism y'all have developed.
Well, apparently, if anyone wants to put in the chat while I figure that part out, I could maybe make a poll.
Okay. Okay, nice. We're getting thumbs up for the demo. Sick. Okay, I will do hyper speed run. I didn't test the full setup before, but I've done it enough that hopefully it goes very quickly. Let me just switch my screen up a little bit here and make sure we're all good to go. So I got all of your wallet addresses, and I will use them for the next session. So thank you all so much. And you can continue to add, and I'll give a little bit more notice next time. Okay. All right. So we're going to start. I'm not sharing my screen. Okay, we're going to start here. So basically what I'll do is quickly mint a token, not on Goerli, but on Gnosis chain, which is a side chain on Ethereum, create a Gnosis safe multi-sig, and deploy the exit module, maybe. Well, I can definitely do those. I probably won't be able to do the full exit, but it will give you a cool idea of what Ethereum looks like. So you can use this cool Open Zeppelin contracts wizard, where you can basically have some kind of presets for deploying different types of tokens. Open Zeppelin, really amazing tool, open source, great people. Here we have an ERC20 token set up, and it's nice. You can kind of set it up here where it's, you can name your token. Any naming suggestions? You can shout it out if anyone wants.
Clarity.
Clarity, nice. So we'll have clarity.
Monk was thrown in the chat. I might have to say that sounds good too. But
okay. Just because I can do that's better. Okay, and we'll make it mintable. We'll make it burnable. We'll make it so you can do snapshots easily of it and votes easily with it. Ownable, this means that basically you can check here what any of these means. Basically, the contract that mints this token, that runs this code, which will be me, owns the token. And you can set up a license as well. So we'll go and take this code and then we'll open it in Remix. So Remix is a cool kind of IDE for Ethereum, like a development environment that you can use in your browser. And you can basically compile and deploy code on it. So let me see, it's been a little bit since I've done this from Remix. So we have this code here. So I've done this once before. Auto compile. So we're going to take and compile this contract. And we have it here. We have the monk contract. I'm logged in via MetaMask. I want to here, and I want to set my environment so that it takes my injected wallet. So here we go. So it's so basically what I'm doing, the code is here. It's in Solidity. It has to be compiled. It was compiled. Now we're over here, and we have to set the environment before we deploy it. So we want the address that will kind of own and deploy this code. And that is, I already connected before the session my MetaMask wallet. So that contract address will be deploying the code, and that's listed here. And it also says on what network. So it says custom 100 network. What that means actually is Gnosis chain, the side chain. Every chain in the Ethereum ecosystem has a chain ID. Gnosis chain is 100. Usually it will say like the Rinkeby or it will say Polygon, but right now it just says custom. And we have the contract that we want to deploy. It's the monk contract. And it will just kind of choose its own address and we'll deploy it. Okay, and it's bringing up my MetaMask, and I'll have to pay a fee in XDAI. And we'll see it's pending. It was deployed. And it was deployed, monk was deployed at this contract address. If I click here, I can copy the contract address. And I should be able to go in my MetaMask. And here, can you guys see my MetaMask?
It pops up, yep.
Okay, cool. I'll want to go and add import tokens. So you can choose your own. Oops, I don't know what I just clicked. Yes, be very careful when you do this. Let me pull it up. So here, import tokens. So we have token up, and it comes up. It knows it's monk. So cool. And it's set with the default decimal amount. So now we've added custom token, and I'm importing it to my wallet. And woo! Basically, the 1,000 monk that I just deployed, because I am the owner, they automatically are now in the contract address, my wallet. So I'm now the owner of 1,000 monk. And what I can do now is go and create a multi-sig safe to kind of start a DAO. So you go to gnosis.safe, you make sure you're on the right network, because unlike MetaMask, safes are different for each network. Monks DAO, and continue. And by default, I'm the only owner. As a multi-sig, I'm going to speed up. As a multi-sig owner, you can set a bunch of different addresses here to, like, if I want me and my 5 monk friends to basically be owners, so I can. But by default, it just has here, and I'll say monk GG for Gnosis Guild. And I'll just create it with 1 owner for now. So this is creating a multi-sig. You can add owners and change the permissions after the creation. So now it's being created. All right, get started. I have my multi-sig safe. Oh, I know what I can do in the next 5 minutes. So I will go to the apps on my multi-sig. Right now, nothing's in the multi-sig, but I will go to the Zodiac app. Oh wait, no, I'll go to this one, the Zodiac app, and I will agree to all of the disclaimers. Basically, those disclaimers are just saying that these apps are developed by third parties, so be careful. And then I'll go to the exit module, and I will enter the token contract address of the monk token. So that's basically the address at which the monk token was deployed at. And I'll add the exit module. And I'll submit it, pay for the transaction. So now anyone who holds monk tokens can redeem a proportional share of this DAO's treasury. However, this DAO's treasury is empty.
Where is the 1,000 monk?
It's still in my MetaMask.
I see. Okay.
So if I'm still holding it here, and my 1,000 monk, and I can choose to send it to the DAO. For the purposes of time, I won't do it for now. But basically what I can do now, oops, I should have just stayed back there. Is if I want to then kind of exit from this DAO, and suppose this DAO has 10 ETH in the treasury, I can then come to the standalone exit app, and I can attach this the address of the safe. And so I put the safe address, the kind of DAO address here. And I'm going to connect my MetaMask wallet that holds my monk. And it shows me that redeem your monk tokens for a share of the safe's assets. So if I send, oh, we still have 2 more minutes, I'll do it. If I send basically some X die here. Let's say 5. Okay, almost done. Once this goes, you'll see the full circle.
Yes.
Are there any questions in the interim? I know we only have 3 minutes. Okay, if I refresh, see, okay, the wallet now has 5 XI, about $5. If I connect my MetaMask, if I am the sole owner of Monk. So if I want to redeem half of my monk tokens, I can get half of the DAO's treasury. So the DAO has 5. I have half of all the monk tokens, which have been set up on the safe's exit mod. So now I can come and redeem half of its treasury, or I can redeem 75% of its treasury for $375. And that's a way for everybody to redeem assets from a DAO given a DAO token. And that's also how to mint the token, set up the safe, and send it, and all the stuff.
Yes, yes. Everyone's very happy to have had the recording. And I think we got there. We got to the end. Thank you for sharing. I have one more screenshot to share, mostly for you, Kia, because I think people in the chat have already seen it. But this is the takeaway for the call.
Very nice.
And Kia, it means so much. Yes, I'm very excited for the next session. We'll make sure to split up the Zoom link so we have the full 75 minutes. And it's great to be thinking through patterns with some of you all, and kind of being in breakout rooms and just seeing what happens. So excited for that, and really grateful, Kia. If you have any parting thoughts,
No.
happy.
I know that was fast, so watch the tutorial and just write on Slack if you have any questions. But I hope it served to demystify that it can be quite fun and easy to do things on Ethereum.
It did indeed. Beautiful.